If there's one skill that determines how much value you get from Claude AI, it's this one. Not the features you use, not which model you're on, not how often you use it. It's how well you write your brief. We introduced the 6-element brief framework in episode 1. We talked about what happens when you brief Claude AI vaguely versus specifically in episode 2. But in both of those episodes, we were treating the brief as a step in a process, something you do before you get to the interesting part. This episode is entirely about the brief itself, because the brief isn't just a step, it's the skill. And like any skill, it gets better with deliberate practice and the right examples. By the end of this episode, you'll have seen 5 different professional scenarios, each one with a weak brief, a strong brief, and a clear picture of what changes in the output. You'll also have a brief writing instinct that kicks in automatically, so you stop thinking about the 6 elements and just write well. That's the goal. Let's get into it. Before the 5 scenarios, a quick note on why the brief matters so much more than anything else. Claude AI is a reasoning tool. It doesn't look things up. It doesn't follow a script. It reads what you give it and produces the best response it can, given that input. Which means the ceiling on what Claude AI can produce for you is determined entirely by what you put in. Give it a thin brief, and it fills in the gaps with assumptions. And those assumptions are generic because Claude AI doesn't know your specific situation. Give it a rich brief, and it has everything it needs to produce something specific, accurate, and actually usable. Most people treat briefing as overhead, something to get through quickly so they can get to the output. The professionals who get the most from Claude AI treat it as the work. The brief is where you think clearly about what you actually need. Claude AI is where you get it produced. That shift in mindset from briefing is overhead to briefing is the work is what this episode is designed to make permanent. And before we get into the scenarios, 2 things worth grabbing from the description if you haven't already. The brief, page 1, is free. It's a 1-page reference card with the full framework and a reusable template. Print it and keep it open while you watch this. And if you want the full structured path through your first week with Claude AI, your first week with Claude AI at work is $20, a 5-day PDF that takes you from first prompt to a fully operational workflow. Both links are in the description. Now, the 5 scenarios. Quick refresher before we get into the scenarios. A strong brief covers 6 things. Role, who you are or what role you're writing from. Audience, who the output is for. Context, the actual situation, with enough detail that Claude AI doesn't have to guess. Outcome, what you need it to produce and what it should accomplish. Tone, how it should feel to read. And constraints, length, format, anything specific. You don't need to use those as a checklist. Once it's built in, you'll just write, and all 6 will be there naturally. The thing to watch for in each scenario today is how the strong brief covers all 6 elements without it feeling mechanical. That's the standard you're working toward. Natural, specific, complete. 5 scenarios. Let's go. 5 professional scenarios, each one universal enough that you'll recognize it regardless of your specific role. 1. The difficult email. 2. The stakeholder report. 3. The meeting prep. 4. The process document. 5. The proposal. For each one, a weak brief, a strong brief, and what changes in the output. By the end, you'll have a reference set you can map directly onto your own work. Scenario 1. The difficult email. The difficult email is the task that sits in your drafts for 2 days. The message where the stakes are real, the relationship matters, and you've been avoiding starting because you're not sure exactly how to phrase it. Here's a weak brief for this scenario. Write an email to a client about a missed deadline. Keep it professional. Claude AI will produce something. It'll be polite, professional, and completely hollow because it doesn't know which client, what deadline, why it was missed, what the relationship is like, what you need the client to do or feel, or how much of the blame sits with you versus circumstances outside your control. What you get back is a template, something you'd find on a business writing website, something you can't send because it doesn't reflect the actual situation. Here's the strong brief for the same scenario. I'm an account manager at a marketing agency. Our team missed the agreed delivery date for a campaign brief by 5 days. The delay was partly our fault and partly because the client kept changing the scope without formally updating the brief. This is a long-standing client we value highly, and I don't want to damage the relationship. But I also need to gently establish that scope changes need to come through proper channels. I need to write an email that acknowledges the delay and takes appropriate responsibility, explains the context without making excuses, and introduces diplomatically the idea that future scope changes need to be formalized. Tone, warm but professional. We have a good relationship with this client. Around 250 words. That brief gives Claude AI the actual situation, the relationship, the dual objective, apologize and set a boundary without damaging the goodwill, the tone, the length. What comes back is an email that sounds like you, that handles the complexity of the situation, that your client will receive and feel appropriately handled by, not brushed off with a generic apology. Notice what made the difference. Not just more words, more specificity, the nature of the relationship, the nuance of the fault, the dual objective, the tone calibrated to that specific client relationship. That's what a strong brief does. It gives Claude AI enough to reason about the situation, rather than just fill in a template. The key lesson from the difficult email scenario: when the stakes are high and the situation is nuanced, your brief needs to be equally nuanced. You can't hand Claude AI a simple task description and expect it to navigate complexity it doesn't know about. The rule for difficult emails: tell Claude AI what you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to avoid, both at the same time. In our example, achieve, acknowledge the delay and take appropriate responsibility. Avoid, making excuses, damaging the relationship, or setting a boundary so bluntly it creates friction. When Claude AI knows both, what you're moving toward and what you're moving away from, it can navigate the tension. That's where it produces its best work. Scenario 2. The stakeholder report. The stakeholder report is the recurring document that summarizes progress, flags issues, and keeps people informed. Every professional produces some version of this: weekly, monthly, quarterly. Week brief. Write a monthly project status report. I'm a program manager at a government agency. I need to write the monthly status report for our digital transformation project. This goes to 12 senior stakeholders, including 3 executive directors, 2 external consultants, and 7 internal team leads. This month, we completed the infrastructure migration on schedule. We're 2 weeks behind on the user testing phase because of resourcing issues that have since been resolved, and we've just confirmed budget approval for the next phase. The tone needs to be factual and measured. These readers don't want spin, they want clarity. Structure: executive summary at the top, then status by workstream, then risks and mitigations, then next month's priorities. Maximum 2 pages. The week brief produces a generic structure with placeholder content. The strong brief produces a document you can actually edit into your final report, because Claude AI knows who's reading it, what happened this month, what the tone needs to be, and how it should be structured. The key lesson here: for recurring documents, build this brief once as a template in Cowork. Update the specifics each month. The structure, audience, tone, and format stay constant. Only the content changes. That's the workflow version of a brief. You write it once and reuse the skeleton indefinitely. The key lesson from the stakeholder report scenario: recurring documents are brief once opportunities. You don't write a new brief every time. You write a template, a master brief that covers the constant elements, and you update only what changes between instances. In Cowork, this lives in your project context. You set it up once. Every month, you open the project, add the current month specifics, and ask Claude AI to produce the report. The structure, tone, audience, and format are already there. Over 3 months, the amount of time you save on a single recurring document is significant. Over a year, it's transformative. The brief isn't just a prompt, it's an asset. Build it properly once, and it compounds. Scenario 3. The meeting prep. Meeting prep is one of the most underused Claude AI use cases. Most professionals wing it. They know the topic, they have a vague agenda, they show up and hope the conversation goes well. Claude AI can turn that into something much more deliberate, but only if you brief it properly. Week brief. Help me prepare for a client meeting about the project. I'm a senior consultant about to have a 1-hour review meeting with the CEO and COO of a mid-sized retail client. The project is a 6-month operational efficiency review that's now at the halfway point. The good news? We've identified 3 significant cost-saving opportunities worth around $2 million annually. The challenge? The implementation timeline we proposed is longer than they wanted, and the COO in particular has been pushing for faster results. My objectives for the meeting are to present the findings confidently, manage expectations around the timeline without losing their confidence, and get sign-off on moving into the implementation phase. I need a 10-minute agenda, the 3 key points I need to land, the most likely objections and how to handle them, and a suggested close that gets us to implementation sign-off. The difference is everything. The week brief produces a generic meeting prep template. The strong brief produces specific talking points, objection handling tailored to the CEO's known concern about speed, and a close strategy, all calibrated to the actual stakes of that specific meeting. The key lesson from the meeting prep scenario: brief Claude AI on what you know about the people in the room, not just the topic of the meeting. What does the CEO care about? What's the COO's known concern? What's the relationship history? What's the emotional temperature of this meeting? Is it routine, tense, high stakes, celebratory? Claude AI can't read the room, but you can describe the room to it. And when you do, it can help you prepare for the version of the meeting that's most likely to happen, not a generic version of a meeting with those job titles. Great meeting prep briefs always include what you need to achieve, what you're worried might go wrong, and who specifically you're dealing with. All 3, every time. Scenario 4. The process document. The process document is the thing that exists in everyone's head and nowhere on paper. Every organization has dozens of them, informal processes that depend on whoever happens to know them, that disappear when people leave, that produce inconsistent results because they've never been written down. This is where Claude AI delivers extraordinary value, but only if you brief it with the right inputs. Week brief. Write a process document for onboarding new employees. I'm the HR manager at a 60-person professional services firm. I need to create a written onboarding process for new employees joining at the junior to mid-level. Currently, there's no written process. It's completely informal and inconsistent. New hires typically start on a Monday, and their first 2 weeks should cover IT setup and system access on day 1, introductions to their team and key stakeholders in week 1, completion of mandatory compliance training by end of week 1, assignment to their first project with a named buddy by start of week 2, and a formal 30-day check-in with their manager. The document needs to be clear enough that any manager at the firm could run the process without asking for help. Format: numbered steps with clear ownership for each step, either HR, the hiring manager, or IT. Plain language, no jargon. Include a 1-page summary at the front. The week brief produces a generic onboarding checklist. The strong brief produces a document that reflects the actual structure of your organization, the specific sequence you want, the ownership model you need, and the format that will actually get used. The key lesson from the process document scenario: for process documents, your brief needs to contain the process itself, at least at the high level. Claude AI can't invent your process. They can structure, clarify, and document it, but the knowledge has to come from you. This is actually one of the most valuable uses of Claude AI for organizations. The tacit knowledge, the stuff that lives in people's heads, gets externalized, structured, and documented. But that only happens if you put it into the brief. Think of it this way. The brief for a process document is basically a brain dump. You tell Claude AI what the process is, roughly, in whatever order it comes out. Claude AI turns it into a structured, clear, usable document. That's a genuinely powerful division of labor. You bring the knowledge, Claude AI brings the structure. Scenario 5. The proposal. The proposal is the document with the highest stakes and the most complex brief requirement. Because a proposal isn't just a piece of writing, it's an argument. It needs to understand the reader's situation, anticipate their concerns, and make a case that's specific to them. Weak brief. Write a proposal for a consulting project. I'm a partner at a small management consulting firm. We've been asked to submit a proposal to a regional hospital network for a 12-week operational review of their patient flow processes. The hospital's CEO mentioned in our initial conversation that their biggest concern is patient wait times in the emergency department. They've had some negative press recently, and the board is applying pressure. They've also indicated budget is tight, and they'd be resistant to anything that feels like a long engagement with uncertain outcomes. Our firm's strength is that we've done similar work at 3 comparable hospital networks and achieved measurable results, averaged 22% reduction in ED wait times within the review period. The proposal should open by demonstrating we understand their specific situation, present our methodology clearly, reference our comparable case studies, address the timeline and budget concern directly, and close with a clear call to action. Tone, confident and specific, not generic consulting language, around 800 words. Structure, executive summary, understanding of the situation, proposed approach, relevant experience, timeline and investment, next steps. That brief produces a proposal that speaks directly to the CEO's known concerns, leads with relevant evidence, and addresses the budget sensitivity head-on. Not a generic consulting proposal, a specific argument for this client in this situation at this moment. The key lesson from the proposal scenario: for high-stakes documents, brief Claude AI on what you know about the reader's situation, not just your own. In our example, the CEO's known concern about wait times, the board pressure, the budget sensitivity, the negative press, all of that went into the brief. Because a proposal is only persuasive if it demonstrates that you understand the reader's world, and Claude AI can only demonstrate that understanding if you've described it. The more you know about your reader's situation, and the more of that knowledge you put into the brief, the more targeted, persuasive, and usable the output. Before you brief Claude AI on any high-stakes document, ask yourself, what do I know about this reader that someone who'd never met them wouldn't know? Put all of that in the brief. 5 scenarios. Let's pull out the patterns. First, specificity over length. A long, vague brief is worse than a short, specific one. Every word in your brief should be doing work. Specific details about the situation, the people, the objective, not filler. Second, what you're moving toward and what you're moving away from. For anything with nuance or stakes, Claude AI needs both: what the output should achieve and what it should avoid. This is what allows it to navigate tension rather than flatten it. Third, tell Claude AI what you know about the reader, not just who they are in terms of job title, what they care about, what they're worried about, what they respond to. The more specific your reader description, the more targeted the output. Fourth, for recurring documents, build the brief as a template. Write it once, update the specifics. Let the skeleton compound. Fifth, include the structure if you have one. If you know how the output should be organized, tell Claude AI. Don't make it guess at format when you have a preference. Those 5 patterns cover 90% of what separates average briefs from great ones. Not the 6-element checklist, these deeper habits that the framework is pointing toward. Here's a quick test you can run on any brief before you send it. Read what you've written. Ask yourself, could someone who had never met me, never worked in my organization, and had never dealt with this specific situation produce something genuinely useful from this brief? If the answer is yes, you've written a strong brief. If the answer is no, there's something missing. Usually it's one of 3 things. The actual situation isn't described clearly enough. The reader isn't specific enough. Or the objective, what you want the output to accomplish, isn't defined tightly enough. Run that test on your next 5 briefs. It'll tell you exactly where your briefing habit needs work. Here's the practical takeaway from everything in this episode. Build a brief library, a small collection of strong briefs, one for each of your most common professional tasks that you keep somewhere accessible and reuse. Not copy-paste verbatim, adapt, but start from a strong brief rather than a blank page every time. Your brief library might have 6 entries: the difficult email template, the monthly report template, the meeting prep template, the process document template, the proposal template, and whatever the most common task in your specific role is. Each one takes 10 minutes to build properly the first time, and each one saves you time and produces better outputs every time you use it from then on. If you've got the $20 starter kit, your first week with Claude AI at work, days 1 and 3 are essentially a guided brief library build. Day 1 gives you the framework template. Day 3 gives you the 5 professional task templates with examples. That's your starting set. If you haven't grabbed it yet, the link is in the description. $20. The brief library alone is worth more than that in time saved in the first week. Here's where we are in the channel. Episode 1 gave you the foundation, the brief framework, your first co-work project, the starting point for a professional workflow. Episode 2 gave you the 5 mistakes and their fixes, the habits that take you from occasional user to someone building a system. This episode gave you 5 worked scenarios and the patterns that make briefs genuinely strong. Episode 4 is where we bring all of that together and build a complete Claude AI workflow for a real professional role, end to end. Context, tasks, outputs, system. The whole thing in one episode. 2 things in the description before you go. The brief, 1 page, is free. If you've been watching this episode without it open, go and grab it now. 1 page, printable, the full framework, and a reusable template. It's the thing that makes everything in this episode actionable immediately. And your first week with Claude AI at work is $20. If you want a structured path through the first 5 days, brief templates, co-work setup, workflow building, and a review, that's what it's for. 5 days, immediate download. Links in the description. That's episode 3. 5 scenarios, 5 patterns, 1 test you can run on every brief from today forward. The brief is the skill. Everything else is downstream of it. Get this right, and Claude AI becomes a different tool entirely. Serious skills, actual output, every time. See you in the next one.